So apparently it is easier to make babies than to come up with the Sonos headphones. In the time that Sonos filed the patent in 2019 for Sonos headphones, it's been 4 years since, and if I had worked really hard, I'd probably have 4 or maybe even 5 kids by now. Now before we go on to talk about the Sonos headphones, which I have called the Sonos Go in a previous video, we have to talk about what the wireless headphone industry is like, what is available in the supposed price range of $400 to $500 in order to appreciate what Sonos has to do and why they will take 4, maybe 5 years to develop the Sonos headphones. Now, will it launch? Well, likely. Now, this is 2023, it's the end of 2023, and by the time you watch this video, it could already be the first day of 2024. In 2023, Sonos launched the Era 100 and Era 300 together in the same time within the first half of the year, and in the later half of the year, they launched the Sonos Move 2, which was a big jump up, especially in the battery department over the Sonos Move 1. Now that was a portable speaker which also uses Bluetooth, and the Era 100, Era 300 also supports Bluetooth. So you can see where Sonos is moving to. They have been shunting Bluetooth in the past, but now they are going all in. But when I say all in, it is not really, all the way in, because they are still using Bluetooth 5.0 and only supporting SBC and AAC. Now that is very friendly to a lot of devices. Almost any phone, any device that you want to connect to Bluetooth using Bluetooth, well, will either support AAC or SBC. And if you are in the Apple ecosystem, you are kind of stuck with a maximum of AAC anyway, unless you are using Android, which then open up a whole world of aptX variants as well as the LDAC and the LHDC. So will the Sonos Go headphone launch? It likely will. They have hinted at that. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that they think that they're going to sell $100 million worth of products in that industry, so likely to be the headphones. Now, before we go on to talk about Sonos headphones, we have to talk about what is available in the market, like I said earlier. And off the top of my head, Sonos is going to have to fight the 3 titans within the wireless headphone market right now. The first being, this is the Sony, this is the WH-1000X Mark IV, Mark V actually, M5. So this is a very capable set of headphones, wireless, and it supports LDAC. I'll talk about the rest in just a little bit. This is the Bose Ultra, Bose QC Ultra, Quiet Comfort Ultra. It's newly launched within the last 1 or 2 months or so, and I have a pair of this in my hands. Now the previous QC45, or the Bose that is before this, they used to only support AAC and SBC, so you are kind of limited to the kind of bit rate that you can get out of those phones. Now this Quiet Comfort Ultra, it actually has Snapdragon sound from Qualcomm, so it actually supports aptX adaptive. Now I'll talk a little bit more about all these standards in just a little bit, and the last of the 3 titans, this will be the AirPods Max. So this is an Apple device, Apple headphone, solid noise cancelling. There are other issues which I'll talk about in just a little bit. So if you have some time, stay around. If you don't have time, I'll give you the upfront summary. Before the Sonos headphone comes out, then this will be the pair that you are looking for. This is the Bose QC Ultra, best wireless in this price range right now on the market. Now there are, of course, some of you who will say, oh, maybe the Shure Aonic A50 is going to be better. Maybe Head has a new wireless Wi-Fi capable Bluetooth headset as well, but that costs $2,200. So I'm talking about all these. They are roughly within the same price range at launch of about $400 to $600. Why I put $600 is because this guy costs more than $500. And sure, we'll dive in deep right now. No time, then just get the Ultra. I'll talk about why I think the QC Ultra from Bose is the best headphone you can buy. So the Bose Quiet Comfort Ultra, this is the most important headphone that you can get right now today before the Sonos headphones arrive. And why do I say it's the most important? I'll give you one thing, Snapdragon sound, right? Because all the Bose before this, right, even up to the flagship Bose 700, They do feature cutting-edge noise cancellation, active noise cancellation, but they are missing out on the transmission protocol. So the transmission protocol has always been limited to either AAC or SBC. They support up to 16-bit sample depth and samples at up to 44.1 kilohertz per second. Kilohertz means per second anyway. So 44,000 samples per second. So at that point in time, when Bose was only limited to 16-bit and 44 kilohertz, you have then the Sony, the WH-1000XM4, they support LDAC. And LDAC is capable of transmitting at 24-bit over 96 kilohertz, 96,000 samples per second. So this will then be the highest end transmission protocol you can find in any wireless headset. Well, of course, until the Ultra came about. Now, then you have the AirPods Max. The AirPods Max, they are really expensive. I think it's like $550 or so. At launch, you probably might be able to find somewhere cheaper. It's a little bit long in the tooth right now at the moment, but this supports 16-bit at 44.1 kilohertz. Now, why? Because none of the devices, not the iPhones, not the iPads, not the MacBooks, not the Mac Ultras, whatever, they do not support anything more than 16-bit and 44.1, and they only support AAC as well as SBC. So the AirPods Max will do well, right? Just to deliver on that front. So you will understand that this is actually not something that is capable of high resolution audio over Bluetooth. So far we've been talking about Bluetooth. So before we talk about Wi-Fi, I need to quantify why I think that the Bose QC Ultra is the best headphone that you can buy today. Now, first, well, and it's literally in the name itself, QC, quiet comfort. So the first point being quiet. Now the ANC for the Bose Ultra, Bose has always done well in the active noise cancelling department, and there was no exception. So with the QC45, it was probably on par with the Sony WH-1000XM5, and both of them did exceptionally well. I traveled with both the QC45 as well as the Sony WH-1000XM5, and I have to shorten the name for some to move on faster in the video, the XM5, right? So the XM5, actually, I traveled with them and I used them quite extensively, except that I was on an iPhone, so I didn't get any of the benefits of the higher bit rate and higher bit depth on the higher sampling rate of the XM5. Now, until I got this. This is an Oppo phone. This is the Oppo Open, right? And it's running Android. And because it runs Android, it opens up the world of possibilities to both LDAC as well as aptX. Whatever variant there is out there, aptX Adaptive being the newest one. Now I talk about those in just a little bit, but before I go on to that, quiet, right? The ANC on this is superb. Now some will argue that maybe the AirPods Max, the ANC is slightly better, but I do think that the ANC on the AirPods Max, they actually introduce some weird artifacts. It's like I can hear a subtrack about a couple of, maybe 100 milliseconds after the sound comes through, and that is more apparent in vocals and the tracks that I listen to in vocals. Not only that, the whole sound core quality is not the best, right, when ANC is turned on, but it does have superb transparency mode. So for that, the quiet part of it, the QC, the quiet part of the name of this moniker is actually one of the reasons why I think this will be the best headphones that you can buy today, right? At this point in time, before the Sonos headphones launches. Now, the second part, again, is in the name, comfort. Now, this is really comfortable. It is light. It is really, really light. So in terms of comfort and weight, you know, by hand, you won't be able to tell which is heavier between the XM5 as well as the QC Ultra. But this is a behemoth. This is a monster. It is very, very heavy, weighing maybe like a pound or so. So in terms of comfort, this is not it, right? And in terms of comfort, the whole leather padding and all, this is a wonderfully comfortable headphone. And even before I had this, I was using the QC45 quite a bit because they are light and they are comfortable. Now you have to then talk about the build quality. Now the build quality, of course, the Apple, the build quality is built like a tank, but there's a lot of aluminum, a lot of metal in this, and I don't like it because it makes it really, really heavy. But in terms of build quality, it's fine, you know. And you have this knob at the top that can control volume. The knob is excellent. Now the Sony XM5, The build quality it feels plastic because none of it looks metal. Everything looks like a matte plastic, pretty durable, and all the hinges don't creak and everything is good. The control panels are actually touch sensitive, so you don't get many buttons. You get 2 buttons here, and you will be able to use them well. I mean, it's not exceptional in build quality, but it is well put together. Very plastic though. But for the QC Ultra, now these are metal bands here. Well, I don't know whether it's metal, but there are some parts of it that looks like metal anyway. And the whole sliding is smooth. The whole mechanism to actually wear it is good. The build quality of the Bose QC Ultra is wonderful. I wanted white because white shows up better on video against my dark background. But when I saw the white, I didn't really quite like the color scheme. This is very well muted, matte black with maybe very dark gray, aluminum, titanium look to it. Very, very subdued design. Now, when you're wearing this, it sure beats you trying to wear the AirPods Max. But you can't get away without talking about the sound quality, and that's the 4th point I'm going to be talking about for the QC Ultra. Now, the QC Ultra sound quality is actually right up there with the rest. Now, it is a little bit bass heavy, so I'm not sure if this is your style, this is your pattern, but this will be right up your alley if you like bass heavy tracks. And the bass is actually more focused on the lower end of the bass, about 30 Hertz or so, or below 50 Hertz. Whereas if you're looking at the Sony, the XM5, they actually have decent bass as well. But the problem is that the bass is boosted up at the 100, 200, 300 Hertz or so. So that's the mid bass, and I find that to be a little bit overemphasized. And because of that, a lot of vocals, especially the male vocals, they tend to boom a bit and they appear much too loud and maybe not so intelligible. The sound on the QC45 is a lot darker, is a lot more subdued and more mellow, especially in the bass department. Now, when it comes to the AirPods Max, I wanted to like the sound a lot because it looks really high quality audiophile from the build quality itself. But the problem I have with the AirPods Max is always that, you know, I spoke about the artifacting a little bit earlier on. I think when ANC is turned on, you do hear, especially the quieter vocal passages in a song, you hear something like an echo. I don't know whether it is specific to me and I'm the only one hearing it, but I do hear it and it is distracting, especially listening to the simpler tracks where there's only one vocal track running. On top of that, the AirPods Max, they are actually sounding very screamy. Why do I say that? It is a little bit bright, and the vocals and the sound is all crammed to, you know, what's in front of you. It kind of like it shouts in your face. So I'm not a fan of that kind of soundstage. Now, all these devices that we're talking about here, the Sonys, the Apple, as well as the Bose, they are driven a lot by software, right? Some of the true audiophiles, you won't like this kind of things. And maybe for you, the Shure Aonic A50 is probably the better bet because that focuses on the hardware itself. It makes sure that the amps driving the drivers are all of top range quality, and you actually hear the sound unadulterated, right? Not affected by over processing. And because, you know, all these, they have some kind of spatial audio and all that kind of things, which is, I admit, kind of gimmicky, but it does change the sound if you prefer it that way. So the option is definitely there for you. So in terms of sound quality, I do think that the Bose sounds the most natural and will present a very likable, very lovable kind of sound for most people. Well, at least for me, I don't know whether I'm the most people, but so far, people whom I know owns the Bose Sound QC45, QC35, even back then when it was the older Bose. The sound is always quite pleasant to listen to, if not a little bit overemphasized on the lower bass range. So the last thing about this, which is the most important point that I mentioned earlier, high-res audio. Now, I'm using this term loosely, okay? High-res audio actually specifies that it needs to be 24-bit and at least 96 kilohertz sampling rate. But, you know, this doesn't do 96 kilohertz sampling rate because even aptX adaptive doesn't go up to 96 kilohertz on this set of cans. So we got to understand a little bit why that is important. Now, if you wanted hi-fi music, if you have a whole set of files on ALAC or FLAC, and they're sitting on your library, you have MQA files, you have all those OBB, Vogus mastered files sitting on a nest somewhere, and you're trying to play them back, then yes, because you will need the transmission to be as lossless as possible. And the AirPod Max, definitely, they don't do that unless you wire it. So wiring is one option. This LDAC, yes, LDAC supports up to 96 kilohertz, but LDAC actually demands 990 kilobits per second of transfer rate wirelessly. Now, if it doesn't hit that, it will actually step back the sound quality. It drops to 660 kbps, and if it still is not stable enough, it drops back to 330 kbps. Whereas on the Bose Ultra, the Bose QC Ultra, they will support between 279 kbps and 420 kbps, and the stepping is actually 10 kbps in between. So the whole range is there, and the stepping will be sampled, and it will check whether the connection is actually good enough. Of course, granted, 420 is nowhere close to the 990 afforded through LDAC, but 990 is not really achievable in most instances unless you have ideal, very wirelessly noise-free environment. So right now, this is it. Now, if you are trying to listen to Spotify, honestly, right, you won't be able to tell the difference. If you convince yourself that there is a difference, the difference is actually not due to the transmission protocol. It's because these are actually different headphones to begin with. The drivers, the amp, the sound profile is all different. It is not because there is a difference in the transmission, because Spotify only goes up to 16-bit and 44.1 kilohertz sampling rate. So when you are looking at 16-bit and 44.1, even having a higher resolution transmission protocol, it won't make a difference. So if you think that you're getting better sound from LDAC through this, then no, it won't. Unless there's some other things that's at work there. I've done a video on that before. And when you are going over LDAC, and if you do any form of EQ, which means there's one layer of processing, yes, then it allows for a higher resolution, a higher band, because there are more bits and more bit depth to play around with. Now, all this is sounding very, very technical, and I'm sorry about that. I don't have time to make a whole long video, so it's actually hard for me to share that with you. But if you think about what this means, right? The Bose QC Ultra today supports aptX adaptive, and aptX adaptive will allow 24-bit, which is arguably a lot better than the 16-bit that is afforded through any Apple ecosystem products. Now, if you are pairing any of these with an Apple product, it doesn't matter, because Apple only goes up to 16-bit via AAC or SBC, so it will not be able to utilize a higher bandwidth. But if you are pairing it with an Android device, right, then it supports up to 24-bit, or maybe even Windows device if it is capable. You can actually get higher resolution audio when it's paired to that. But if you are on iPhone, or if you are listening to Spotify on either Android or iPhone, it's really not going to make a difference. So don't trick yourself into thinking that. But why I say that this is important is because, well, in case you are on Android, or in case in some point in time in the future Apple decides to support 24-bit sampling, then yes, you will be able to utilize this. So these are by far the most forward-looking pair of headsets on the market right now. And aptX adaptive actually has a much lower latency than LDAC. Now, SBC and AAC, which is on the AirPods Max, they do have about a 200 millisecond latency. But LDAC actually has more than 200 milliseconds of latency. So that is a bad thing. But a lot of software today, a lot of phones and devices we use, they actually compensate for the latency. So when you click play, the video doesn't actually play immediately. It buffers for a little bit, a fraction, 200 milliseconds, so that the audio and the video is actually synced directly. But when you're gaming or when you're on a phone call, then that is what matters, because there's no delaying that. Now, for aptX adaptive, the whole response time, the whole latency drops all the way down to 80 milliseconds. So that is actually an important function. So when I have gone through all this, right, there are a few options that you can get past all these whole Bluetooth problems. One of which is, of course, to go wired. So the Bose QC, they actually allow for you to plug in with a supplied cable to any 3.5 mm output, right? And that will give you analog, and you won't suffer any of these issues. So whatever resolution your player is playing at or your device is playing at, everything is transmitted as is, but in an analog format. So there's very little processing on the QC side. But we don't want wired because we are wireless audiophile, right? So the only other way to go about doing it to circumvent the entire issue with Bluetooth, right? So you don't get problems with LDAC, you don't get problems with aptX or whatever variant, is to use Wi-Fi, right? So this is Snapdragon Sound. Snapdragon Sound, actually, it can support Wi-Fi, and that's through a technology they call XPAN, right? Expanded Personal Area Network. But that requires a chip from Snapdragon, and that's the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. So most devices out there, they are not Gen 3 as of now, and this doesn't support Wi-Fi. So why I say that this is the most important until the Sonos headphone comes out is because the Sonos headphone is likely to support Wi-Fi streaming. Now, there are challenges for Sonos, right? And this is the point where we start talking about those challenges and start to appreciate why they take 4 years, 5 years, and they still haven't come out with the Sonos headphones, right? Even though most people would have been able to produce 4 or 5 babies in their time. Now, if you think about what a Wi-Fi capable headphone needs to do, there are a few ways, right? So there is a company called Head. So Head is a relatively new company. They have produced this Wi-Fi capable headphone, which is called the Head Unity. Now the Head Unity, just to get it out of the way, it costs $2,200 US, right? So it is not in the same price range. You could buy all these three and you have spare for the kind of money that you're going to be paying for the Head Unity. But Head Unity has a Wi-Fi module built in. Now, what Head does is that it's not using Snapdragon, right? So it's not using Snapdragon Sound. You don't require a specific Android implementation to actually use it. But what it does is that it uses the app and it starts communicating with the headphones. The Head Unity headphone, there is a processor inside. There's a dual core processor inside. So in the headphone itself is actually a computer. And this computer is the one that is pulling the sound via Wi-Fi, right? So that's where the difference is. And why do we know that? Because when you are using the Head Unity headphone and you are streaming from the phone itself, it doesn't actually transfer the sound from the phone to the head. It actually instructs the head, right, to pull the sound from the streaming service. Or if you have any sound files or music files that is on your device, you can actually stream that across using Wi-Fi to the head, which will then process it and play back the sound. Now, if you're trying to take a phone call on the head, yes, Head says that you can take phone calls, but it goes through Bluetooth. And that Bluetooth implementation is prior to Bluetooth 5.0, and it falls back to SBC and AAC. So that's the problem with Head, right? Head, yes, it has Wi-Fi, but the Bluetooth implementation is actually very, very backward, and all for $2,200. So if you think about what Sonos has to do, Sonos has to do two things, and Sonos has to get these two things right, okay? Wi-Fi implementation has to be similar, on par with the Sonos Move or the Sonos Roam, which Sonos is very familiar with at this point in time on how to make them work together, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. And note that the Era 100 and Era 300 have paved the way for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth to be used at the same time. So you can actually see the headphone, use it even though you're connected via Bluetooth. So the first thing is they've got to get the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth implementation correct. Now, the next thing that Sonos has to do is to ensure that the experience is similar for iOS users as well as Android users. And that is important. Why do I say that? Because Sonos right now at this point has implemented Bluetooth only using AAC and SBC. So you don't get LDAC and you don't get aptX adaptive or any variant of aptX or high resolution Bluetooth streaming. Now, that is important, right? So the Wi-Fi part, we know Sonos can do very well, but it is the Bluetooth part that I'm concerned about how Sonos is going to do it. Now, if you fall out of Wi-Fi range, right, and you and you're going to be depending on your iPad or iPhone or your Android device to stream Bluetooth, you want that experience to still be good, right? But if you are defaulting to AAC and SBC, then you are no better off than maybe this or the previous Bose QC 45. So that is where I think is the crux of the issue. Sonos needs to figure out the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi implementation properly and carefully. And if they were to embed a streamer within the headphone, then that's where the next challenge is, because Wi-Fi takes up a lot of energy, right? So the whole battery life, like the Head Unity, has a 6 to 8 hour battery life, which is not acceptable for a pair of headphones. This will go for over 24 hours. The Sony will go for over 30 hours. This one may be a little bit less, I think. I don't remember because I don't use it a lot. But 6 to 8 hours is not acceptable, right? That's the Head Unity. Sonos needs to put this up in excess of 20 hours, right? You need the headphones to last more than 20 hours. But when you have a processor on board that is pulling from the streamer's stream, then you're going to have a problem, because you got to power the Wi-Fi antenna and you got to process and stream the music using a processor. So that is why it is so hard to actually come up with the Sonos headphones. Now, the easier way, of course, is to take the Head Unity way, but it will require the Sonos S2 app to actually then stream the sound from the phone to the headphones using Wi-Fi, which is not an ideal implementation at all. So the best is for the Sonos headset to actually have a processor as well as the Wi-Fi antenna, so it acts like a standalone computer with a streamer built in that is capable of playing sound. And all this needs to be powered, right? So that is probably where the challenge is. Like how Iron Man was limited by the technology of his time, this is now unlocked, right? Because we think that battery life is getting better, and the CPU, the processing units are going to be more efficient and it uses less power. And that's what Snapdragon promises. Now, the thing is that Sonos won't be using Snapdragon. If they are going to be putting a processor within their whole headset, they will not be using Snapdragon. They will be using their own, like Sonos Move and Sonos Roam. They don't use Snapdragon. They have their own processor, which I think Sonos is actually capable of doing right now. It's just changing it to the form factor. And one thing that Sonos will be able to do from there is also, think about it, AirPlay. Because the Sonos Roam and the Sonos Move, they support AirPlay. So if you have AirPlay that is built into the whole Sonos headphone, then you probably have another winner and you have another game changer on the hands. But that will actually limit it to only iOS devices, which is not what you want. Then you have to think about Chromecast. But basically, you know how deep this topic is, and you now appreciate how difficult it is for Sonos to come up with that device. But when it does come up, you can be sure I will get it. But barring two things. So I think Sonos needs to pay attention to these two more things that I'm going to be bringing up, and is inspired by what I'm holding in my hand, which is the Bose QC Quiet Comfort Ultra, and literally in the name itself, quiet and comfort. Now, the Sonos headphone needs to be quiet, right? Which means to say it needs to be ANC, and at the supposed price range that they're going to be charging between $400 to $500 it has to have ANC. Now, even the cheapest ANC, the cheapest earbuds today, they claim to have ANC anyway. Implementation may not be the best, but Sonos needs to get that right. Sonos has no experience in headphones, has no experience in personal single-person audio. It knows how to make speakers, but whether it knows how to make noise cancelling speakers is another thing. I hope they get the implementation correct. The second thing is comfort. Now, the comfort and usability needs to be high, right? And that is why I keep hanging on to Bose Quiet Comfort series of headphones, because they are comfortable. And I need the Sonos headphones to be comfortable as well. So between now and 9 months later, I will be happy with the quiet aspect and the comfort aspect of the Bose QC Ultra. And 9 months later, I will have something new. Sonos headphones, not a baby. Although it is actually probably easier to make a baby at this point. So I will see you in one of these videos where I talk about the Sonos Go headphones, or I talk about any of my previous experience that I've had with the XM4 or XM5. I don't know whether I reviewed this, but anyway, I'll see you in one of those videos.